Welcome to Dulles. We're a community of faith that embodies the love of Jesus for the good of our neighbor and renewal of our world. We're so glad you're listening.
We're wrapping up today this series. It wouldn't on paper seem very popular to talk about the advantage of being challenged in life. It almost seems counterintuitive. Like that's not why we live every day. We live every day looking forward to the good and to pleasure. And it's true, we're creatures of comfort. And I would say particularly in the 21st century and particularly in our part of the world, as much as we value education and career and we think about retirement and savings portfolios and all of these things that are part of life, marriage, family, starting a family, the reality is that a lot of us have learned, either intentionally or inadvertently, to make the driving center core of our lives comfort. What makes me more comfortable at work? What makes me more comfortable at home? And in week one, we just talked about how comfort comes at a cost. It's risky to live this way. In this broken world of ours where humans tried to take control, we tried to be God, and it spun everything into chaos. God has entered this world of chaos, and he works within the constructs of struggle, of hurt, of heartache, so much so that he's taken on heartache, literally taken pain and hurt and betrayal onto himself. And so he uses discomfort. He uses struggle to do something remarkable in us. And our thinking, our ideology is, well, that's ridiculous. Nothing good can come from struggle. We've got to get to comfort. Isn't that how we think? Isn't that kind of our juxtaposition as we drive to work, as we approach our relationships? We are more comfort-centered, you could argue, and some researchers would say, than ever in history. This generation is more focused on comfort than ever in human history, and yet we're also seeing more and more studies that we're more anxious and more overwhelmed and have more stress than ever in history. And that is hard to reconcile. How can we be so stressed out and so driven towards comfort? There's a breakdown. Something isn't working. Modern comforts aren't actually working. They're not actually helping us in what really matters most. How you view yourself through the lens of God as his child. And relationships. Jesus said in John 16, not my favorite verse of the Bible for a long time, but he's building this context. In this world, while you live on planet Earth, in this broken world, you will have trouble. And so then we went to James. In week one, we jumped into what James wrote. James was the stepbrother of Jesus. And after attributing to his stepbrother that he is the Lord, like who would do that unless he truly believes it? He says this crazy, verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. Church family, those of us who are growing in our faith together, the brothers and sisters is who he's referring to, whenever you face trials of many kinds, consider it pure joy. Like, what? And he goes on, and we spent week one, and if you missed it, you can catch up on our YouTube channel or on our podcast. James goes on to talk about the benefits of facing struggle, of facing trials of various kinds. The antithesis of the way we think. He's listing what God's actually doing in the struggle, in the trial. If you allow God into the struggle, he will build something remarkable and beautiful in you every single time. It's not random, it's every time. In work context, in broken relationships, in betrayal, in your own failure. If you allow God into the brokenness, into the hurt, the pain, he will be building something, constructing something beautiful every time. The tension point in our lives, we spent some time on this. The tension point, where you feel tension in your life, is often where God is most at work. And we don't want it to be that way. We want to get back to the comfort and then say, okay, now God, I can focus on you. Now, God, I can give you credit for what's happening in my life. But when the struggle's happening, don't we often shove God to the side? God, I'll get back to you. I just can't right now, God. How counter to God's kingdom. We end at week 1 talking about feeling pounded. When life is pounding you, when it feels like life is overwhelming you or just pounding you, for people of faith who understand that God is at work in the struggle, we see that God is actually forming us in those moments. In week 2, we went to the next verse in James. James 1, we went to verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. In the context of trial or struggle, overwhelming challenge, don't just get back to God later and don't try to figure it out or solve it yourself. Ask God for wisdom. God, what are you doing? What is your strategy in this? Rather than just whining about being overwhelmed, God, you are doing something. And it's not just Brad who said it on Sunday. I know in my spirit you're doing something beautiful. If I will allow you, you're constructing something good and beautiful and true. And we ended week 2 with this statement. I got some text from you, and actually in the lobby, some said, man, that really kind of hit me. There are often in life things that God wants to change inside you before he changes what's around you. And this is the crux of the matter. This is where faith really begins to develop and grow, where we say, God, before I focus on you solving the external in my life, I'm going to allow you, in fact, I want you to solve the internal of me. So today I'm going to basically read a story, and it's a long story. In Genesis is really seen as 4 segments of the early story of God given to us. And this is the 4th segment we're going to look at, and it's long, so we can't read it all today. I'm going to just kind of talk you through parts of it, and then we'll read, and I'll put on the screen here for you some parts of this. And I want to say up front that comfort isn't necessarily bad. God gives us comfort. There are moments where Amy and I will be sitting on the beach with that drink, and we have that moment. And God, we see many times in the Psalms, many times Jesus himself will refer to retreating away. And we know the context of where he would retreat up on the hill or on the mountainside, someplace beautiful, often with a view where he's just quieting his soul. There are moments where comfort is fueling to us, and these are gifts of God. Comfort is not the enemy. What we're not saying in this series is that comfort itself is wrong. It's the desire or the drive or centering our lives around being comfortable, where that becomes a god. Okay, so a Super Bowl story. I still can't believe I have a Super Bowl story, but I do. I worked in what was the Redskins, Washington's chapel program for 5 years when I was in high school and in college. My first youth pastor was the team chaplain, and I recorded on cassette tape each chapel. It was the Saturday night before every game, and I managed the book table. A lot of players would do a Bible study during the week, and I set up the sound system and did all of these kinds of things. And, I just thought I'd died and gone to heaven as a football fan as a kid. And then just kind of, after 5 years, it just became kind of a routine on Saturday nights during football season. And I'll say in the microphone, the greatest moments of my life were marrying Amy and then the birth of my 2 girls. But man, right up there, really, really close, is the night of the NFC Championship game, that chapel, that Saturday night chapel, when the team said to me and someone was assisting me, hey, if we win tomorrow, we want you to go to the Super Bowl with us. And I did. I spent a week in San Diego for Super Bowl 22, which really dates me. That sounds like in the dark ages now, 22. And I got to the airport, and I had not told my family. I hadn't eaten for a day and a half, hadn't slept well because I was afraid to fly. I had developed a fear of flying. And I said in Dulles Airport, I'm not going to go. And my dad pulled me aside, and he just looked at me like, Brad, this is crazy. Are you kidding? You're going to forfeit. This is an entire week and all of these opportunities. And I said, Dad, I just don't want to get on that plane. I don't want to fly. And, thanks to my dad and the friend that was with me, I don't remember if they bribed me or just belittled me not really. I did end up getting on that plane, and I'm so, so, so grateful. It was just a great experience that week and a lot of memories. It is amazing how turned around we can become, because in my mind, comfort was staying on the ground. The good was staying safe and in control. And that's what my fear was. My fear in getting on planes was I was out of control. Isn't it amazing what we can do, what we can forfeit in relationships, in God using us, and actually being a part of someone's life and seeing God's kingdom? Jesus' prayer and the Lord's Prayer, being a part of God's kingdom, being realized on earth as it is in heaven, that you participate in that. How easily we forfeit because of risk, because of challenge, because of discomfort. And sometimes just really cool opportunities. Because we feel the sense of losing control or being out of control. Everything in our lives has taught us to stay in control, be your own God. The answer for you and me is to invite, to crave God, doing something internally where we truly, deeply need peace. God, would you do your most remarkable work in me as I let go of control, let go of my circumstances? Okay, so before we get into the story, I'm going to read. My favorite football player of all time is Joe Montana. I have a picture here of him strategizing with Bill Walsh. What a dynasty those 49ers were. Joe Montana won 4 Super Bowls, lost none. And this is still my argument against Brady. I don't know if this argument works. I still call Joe Montana the GOAT, but Montana did not lose a Super Bowl. He threw 11 touchdown passes and no interceptions, and he was the Super Bowl MVP 3 times. Epic player, my favorite. Amy says I have a man crush on him, but that's not appropriate. Pastors don't have man crushes. So we're going to talk about another Joe, another epic Joe that concludes the first book of the Bible. It covers many chapters. This is such a dramatic story. This would be, think if this was a movie, it would really play well as like a Game of Thrones type story. It's epic. There's violence in it. It's horrendous treatment of people by who should be the safest people in your life kind of story. And the redemption that is at work all along, even before any of us, the readers, can see it. So this is a literal foreshadowing. When you say foreshadow, like Joseph is foreshadowing Jesus, he's a type of Jesus, it can sound like, oh, well, this is kind of mythical. No, this is literal. Joseph was a real person. This all really happened. This is historical. But he is, intentionally by God, a foreshadow of what Jesus would be in the life that Jesus would experience here in our broken world. So for any of you who sometimes feel overwhelmed by life, or like the bad just won't quit, or the struggle, or I ended one kind of heavy part of life and then I go into this broken relationship, like what in the world? The story is for you. And the reality is it's for all of us. Because that's our story in this broken world. Okay, it begins in chapter 37, and I'm going to just set it up here. There's some absolute horrendous family dysfunction setting this up, and who doesn't have family dysfunction? This family certainly did. Abraham's son was Isaac. Isaac's son was Jacob. Well, Jacob was part of the dysfunction. He has 12 sons, and he favors the youngest, named Joseph. Some of that was that Jacob had Joseph when he was an older man, but he ends up showing favoritism to Joseph, and that kind of spins things out of control early. And if that doesn't make things bad enough for the other 11 brothers, Joseph has a dream. And you ever have a dream, just kind of weird dream, like, hey, I was in Walmart with my grandmother, but she died 20 years ago, but I was there with her, and then you want to talk about it? You know, we want to tell at breakfast, or, hey, I had this weird dream last night. Well, Joseph, smartly or not smartly, decides to say to his 11 brothers, hey, I had a dream where God had given me authority over you 11 brothers, and I was in charge, and their hate for him just turned into bitterness, and they plot to kill him. The 11 brothers are actually together talking about killing their youngest brother. And that's where we pick up here in verse 23, Genesis 37:23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, given to him by his father. No special gifts given by Jacob to the other brothers, but this ornate, elaborate robe given to Joseph. They stripped him of his clothes. They took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. The Ishmaelites are traveling to Egypt with these goods. Judah, one of the brothers, says to the other brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's do this. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brother, the brothers agreed. We're dealing right now as a country with this horror of Nancy Guthrie, this story. It's just gut-wrenching. And even last night, the new video that came out last night. And, you know, I had this odd, weird feeling this week, like how tragically beautiful if this story somehow unites our country right now. Because we need to be united. And maybe the Olympics will have an effect of uniting us. And this tragic story, maybe it has the effect of bringing us together. But with the horror of Nancy Guthrie, this real life, we can think the Bible, well, the Bible's just Bible stories. In the news today, we deal with real life. Well, this is real life, and this is a very similar story. This is human trafficking we're reading by the hands of Joseph's brothers. Kidnapping and trafficking. They sell their brother to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. What does that remind you of? What does that sound like? Being sold or betrayed for pieces of silver. The father, Jacob, is worried sick. Nobody can find Joseph. They don't know what's wrong. So the brothers decide to kill an animal and smear its blood on the robe, on Joseph's robe, and they bring it to his father, and he weeps and weeps out loud. He's been torn apart by an animal. And so Jacob believes that Joseph is dead. When the Ishmaelites get to Egypt with their new slave, Joseph, they resell him to Potiphar. Potiphar, who's an officer, he's actually, we would call him probably the director of the Secret Service. Or like maybe the Homeland Security Director is who Egypt would call Potiphar. He was the captain of Pharaoh's security. Verse 34, then Jacob tore his clothes, this is the father, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. All of his sons and daughters came to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn for Joseph until I join him in the grave. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Joseph did nothing to deserve this. And so God is giving us Joseph in his story here very intentionally. This is for you. This story was written and given to you to understand how God works in broken planet Earth. And so far, all we're hearing is bad turned to worse, turned to nightmare. Like, what is God doing? How can God's man here, Joseph, and he is the hero of the story, how can Joseph be treated this way? When is God going to show up? You ever say that about your own life? Like, God, come on, just a break. Do you even see? Do you even have time? Can I even bother you with my prayer, God? It's remarkable. I mean, I think this is maybe the worst. The worst in life is when the ones who should have protected him are the ones who've caused the most harm, actually selling him to strangers. And so far, what we see, Joseph never speaks against God. He never curses God. He only continues to speak in language that God is doing something. This hurts. Life sucks. This is painful. But I can trust God because he's always working good. Joseph trusts God even when betrayal comes from the people closest to him. I mean, how messed up is that? But he still trusts that God is at work. We're going to move ahead here. We're going to skip over chapter 38. Chapter 39. Scripture repeatedly starts saying, if you notice this, it's like you see it and then you can't not see it. How many times the repetition that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And God was with Joseph. 39 verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Now as a servant of Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything that he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. So now he's elevated to attendant of Potiphar. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. Now this is like, well, but he's still a slave. He's still a servant. He's there against his will. But God's at work in the slavery, in the mistreatment, in the horror, elevating him. Joseph sees the evidence of God at work. And sometimes we just want God to solve the problem and put us back on the beach with the drink. And we're missing God's construction process and the development and the maturity. Joseph sees God is doing something beautiful, and I'm going with it. And I'm trusting him. Now, this next part is long. We don't have this on the screen. I'm going to just kind of move ahead here. From the time that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome. That's a setup for what's coming next. Joseph's good-looking. That's an asterisk here in the story. That matters because after a while, Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. Joseph refuses. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" So not only does Joseph deeply trust God, he's a man of integrity when no one's looking. When his master's out in the field working and in charge of all the people, he has this opportunity, and Joseph is staying true to God's heart. And I'll just say, we could go down a really serious rabbit trail here, but when it comes to sex and everything that our world says today about your identity and pleasure and doing what's best for you, God has a plan for us, including the intimacy in our life. And when you are trusting him to work beauty in your life, you're trusting him in his whole plan. And you're following his plan and his timing. And when God says wait, and when God says commitment, you wait, and you're true to commitment. And Joseph is demonstrating that. So Joseph refuses. And though she spoke to Joseph that day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. So she's trying day after day. She's just her provocative approach to him just daily. So one day, he went out to the house to attend to his duties. None of the household servants was inside. Potiphar's wife catches him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." This is, again, repeated. It's just many, many times, day after day. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. There's a place in the New Testament where Paul says, the older English language is flee from sexual immorality. It means run. And the Greek word that Paul uses is don't stop, don't think about it, don't wait 3 seconds. You've got 1 second to decide. In this moment where you know, your gut knows, the Spirit of God is telling you, get out of here, this isn't good, run. And in English, it would be followed with about 6 exclamation points. That word flee, run, get away from this situation right now. That's what Joseph is doing. He leaves his cloak. He just runs. Sold into slavery by his brothers after the plot to kill him. Then he's resold into slavery. And now this is happening. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew, Joseph, has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home, until Potiphar comes home. She told him the same story. That Hebrew slave you brought here to make sport of us, as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak here beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, in verse 19, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Potiphar burns. He entrusted everything to Joseph. Now he's enraged. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. This refrain just continues. Things are going from bad to worse to nightmare, horrific. Like, come on, when does this guy get a break? But the Lord is with him. But the Lord is with him. It's just repeated, I think 8 or 9 times. But the Lord was with him. The Lord showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. I'm going to jump to chapter 41. The context here now is that Pharaoh's run into some trouble and crisis, and now he's had this weird dream. None of the fortune tellers can explain or interpret the dream. So there's talk of this prisoner named Joseph and how God is with him. And maybe he could speak to you, Pharaoh. Maybe he has a response to your dream. And Pharaoh's like, "Bring this prisoner Joseph to me." So now Joseph is going to speak to the king of the earth. Pharaoh was considered the king of planet Earth at that point. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought in from the dungeon. Now, at this point in chapter 41, Joseph's in a dungeon, but the Lord was with him. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Joseph, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer." Can you imagine? After all of this, Joseph is still giving credit to God. He so deeply trusts that God's at work in the dungeon, in the slavery, in the plot by his brothers to kill him, in everything that he's facing. God's doing something. God's at work. God is making beautiful. Even though what's in front of me is turning more ugly at the moment, God is working to beautify, to redeem, to restore. He's building something good and beautiful and true. Now he's giving God credit. It won't be me, but it will be God. Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh. It's going to be 7 years of good and blessing and great weather, and then 7 years of famine. And the famine's going to be horrific. And this is what I would do, Joseph says, if I were you, Pharaoh. I would take the good 7 years and I would store up so that there's food for everyone during the 7 years of famine. I would plan ahead. I believe God's given you this dream, Pharaoh, so that you can lead wisely. And Pharaoh is like, I want to elevate you. You're out of prison. You're now my right hand. And he puts Joseph in charge of the entire nation of Egypt. And this is how Joseph becomes the prince of Egypt. Verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store them, the grain, to be kept in the cities for food. This is to store up for the 7 years of famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh. We'll have this on the screen. And to all of his officials. So Pharaoh asked him, can we find anyone like this man Joseph? One in whom the Spirit of God is? Pharaoh recognizes the Spirit of God is on this man. There's no one as discerning and as wise as you. You, Joseph, shall be in charge of my palace, and all the people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then the edict just goes on and on. Pharaoh trusts Joseph with this element, this group of leaders. In a single day, Joseph goes from prison to the palace to being essentially vice president because of the Lord's favor and what God was preparing. God was preparing Joseph through every step and every challenge and every circumstance to have this level of influence and this level of trust. Pharaoh trusts him. There's this dramatic ending of the story where Joseph reconciles with his brothers and brings them to Egypt so that they would be protected during the famine. And he forgives them. And it's really dramatic. It really is like a movie, motion picture kind of effect. When he forgives his brothers, he reveals who he is. They all realize he's still alive. He's in charge of Egypt. And he says to them, what you meant as harm for me, God was at work all along in the harm, in the intended harm, shaping me for redemption, for rescue, to save many people. In chapter 50, verse 20, what you intended as harm toward me, God intended for good, to prepare to save many lives. Jesus is sometimes called the greater Joseph. Jesus was betrayed for silver, falsely accused, mocked, beaten, crucified, though completely innocent. Even on the cross, he entrusted the Father so deeply that he says, after the brutality of the crucifixion, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Paul and Silas, later in the New Testament, demonstrate this. They're in prison for their faith. They're chained to a prison wall, and at midnight is when prisons go quiet. At midnight, Paul and Silas begin to worship God. And we have a worship night coming up 2 Wednesdays from now, and I'm telling you, something is going to happen that night in the 40 days that follow that open us up, personally and as a church, to what God wants to do in you, in your home, in your relationships, in our church. That only happens when we worship and when we say, God, you have a plan. I trust your plan. I don't see what you're doing at the moment. This hurts at the moment, but I trust you. Paul and Silas sing at midnight the goodness of God, and that prison shakes and they're freed. And prisoners who are listening know of the power of God. The prison guard gives his life to Jesus. I want to end this morning just in a conversation with one of you, Robert. Robert Green has been a friend now for a few years. Come on up, Robert, and join me. I joked that sometimes I interview football players on this Sunday that we're going to talk about Robert's illustrious career, but he actually, did you play football on any level? No. So this is going to be a very quick interview. No, but
I coached once.
You coached football once? How'd that go?
We won.
Oh, good. That doesn't surprise me, knowing you. You've just become a good friend. And your commitment to our church, what you do behind the scenes, is just really encouraging and inspiring. A few years ago now, I think at lunch, you just so casually mentioned the diagnosis you had received. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, I don't know this. And you just, and I could tell you're so used to the story, you seemed casual about it. And how many years ago was the diagnosis?
So I got diagnosed with leukemia in 2008.
Okay, 18 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, wait a minute, wow, Robert. And so we spent, an hour and have since many times, because you've had a couple of relapses and you and I have gotten together a couple of times. Okay, go back to the diagnosis. As we can imagine, what was your reaction? How did you respond?
Well, anybody that's ever been told you have cancer, you don't hear much past that word. And because you're going this way and all of a sudden you're going that way.
Yeah.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
And it was a very tough season. I was going through a job change, a marriage was falling apart, and then this. And I was like, what next? And I went to talk to a pastor friend of mine. He said, you probably don't want to ask that question because God's probably trying to get your attention on some stuff. Didn't know what to do, didn't know which way to turn, and I was very angry because everything I thought that I was in charge of, health, relationships, career, all got turned upside down in 3 months.
Yeah. You surrendered to God. What was that like? How did you make that decision?
Well, I got very good counseling from my pastor friend, and he said, you can try to control this, or you can just let God take over. Mm-hmm. And I'm a type A person, want to be in charge, want everything going my way, and it was a huge struggle to let that go. But I knew, if the marriage works, great. The career thing is a question mark, but the health issue, I'm not an oncologist. I don't know anything about this, so I'm along for the ride on this.
And you said at one point you could control it, try to control it, or you could pray. Like prayer was the other option.
Yeah, it was a weird thing. I had gone to our bank for something, and the girl at the bank that was helping me had a thing on her desk, and it said, in any given situation, you have two options. You can worry about it or you can pray about it, but you can't do both. And it was just a weird thing. I just walked in, I was like, man, that was bizarre.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the roadmap for me.
I think, just sidebar, in this 40 days leading up to Easter of prayer that we're going to do together, I think where maybe you have thought the way I grew up, prayer's random. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. I think God hears prayer, but he just chooses. We're gonna really address that. We're going to address, when does prayer not work? And when does prayer work? And how do we pray correctly and incorrectly? We're going to get into all of that. But you saying you could worry and control or pray was the beginning of your surrender.
Yeah, and it was a very challenging time because, like I said, everything I thought that was well-rooted and concrete just got flipped upside down. And I had to start peeling back the onion, so to speak, of my life to figure out how I was going to deal with this. And it was tough. It was a challenge. So I got diagnosed in 2008. I've had 2 relapses since then. And the last time when you and I met was the second relapse, which meant another trip back to Houston. I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I was like, I'd been on a drug for 8 years and in complete remission for 8 years. And then all of a sudden, I go back out there and the doctor says, well, the disease has figured out a workaround, which was a bizarre concept. I was like, wait a minute, how does a disease figure out a workaround.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he quoted that scene from Jurassic Park. He goes, life finds a way. He says, the thing that's in you is a life, it's part of you,
Yeah.
it's alive.
Yeah.
And he said, our goal is to keep you here and you die of something else. And that's what they've done. But being a type A in charge person, you don't like to let go of that control. And I had to just say, look, whatever you guys tell me to do, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And you've seen God working in the science and the medicine.
Oh, yeah.
And,
It's incredible.
It really is amazing how God has just elevated science to the point that it is today. So they told you may have some relapses. Mm-hmm. This pill may work for 6 years or 7 years, and then we'll probably have a new pill, which has happened twice now. Well, the second relapse, you called me that morning. Mm-hmm. And I remember it vividly, like, hey, I am no longer in remission. I'm having a relapse. Can we meet? I really need to talk to you. So we met at a coffee shop that day. Mm-hmm. And between the time you called me to the time that you met, you said, hey, I'm in a lot better place. I've had time with God. I've had time praying. Yeah, what was that like?
It was a reaffirmation that we're really in charge of absolutely nothing. God's in charge. All we have to do is be stewards of what he gives us, and that whole stewardship concept has really become, part of my life. I grew up in the 80s, the materialistic, more, and that's a fool's folly. That doesn't go anywhere. And everything that we get that we think is good or bad comes from him, because the thing that happened to me that day was I realized, hey, 10,000 years ago, God knew I was going to be here today. Yeah. And if he knew that then he knows what the next 10,000 is going to be, and I'm just going to hand it over. And it was a little bit of a bumpy ride. I mean, if anybody's ever been told you have cancer and it's in remission and you lived your life normally for 8 years, and then all of a sudden it's like, boop, oh, here we go again.
I went to the coffee shop that day, just, very prayerful, heavy for you. I could hear it in your voice when you called me. And when you got out of the car, you looked almost happy. And you had told me this about control. You said, I've had time with God since I called you, and I'm back in that place where I know I'm not in control. You said, you speak to the illusion of control. Mm-hmm. You talk about this, that control is an illusion.
It is. At least I figured out that it is not a tangible thing, because every day is a gift, and we don't know what we're going to be given in that day, good or bad. But if you are submissive and submitted, he's got it. You just got to be prepared and be attentive to what he's giving you to deal with. Because there's something that's, I told you I was mad about it for years. And then one day I got a phone call from a friend of mine who had been diagnosed with the exact same thing I had. And I was like, wait a minute, now I get it. Because I had been through the process, I now could help him through the process.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen a lot.
Yeah.
People call and say, hey, what about this? And I never really saw that as an after effect of going through it.
Well, even the day at the coffee shop, your faith was so palpable. I'd heard the pain earlier, a couple hours earlier, and then to see you say, Brad, we're not in control. God's got this. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's good because I've put him back in control again.
Yeah.
That next trip to Houston, they were like, Robert, we have a new pill now. And you've been in remission again now for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so they had to wean me off the drugs I was on, and in the process, the disease that I have took off, and my numbers went, everything with leukemia is blood numbers and markers, so they're testing me every day, and my numbers are going through the roof. And they're trying all these different things, and I put me on a clinical trial, and that didn't work, and then the doctor comes in, and he goes, this isn't working, I'm going to just treat you myself. I'm taking you off the clinical trial. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks while they did what they did, and then a normal white blood cell count is 5 to 10,000. Mine was 42,000. It had been as high as 150,000.
Wow.
But it was 42,000, and within 36 hours, it was normal. They did their medicine, and within 36 hours, I was back to normal.
And he told you he expects you to probably die as a very old man.
Well, he says that's the goal.
Yeah.
He says we want you to die of something else, whatever that is. He said, but I've been so blessed that every time I have a relapse, they have an answer.
Yeah. And you see God at work in that. Your faith to say, okay, I freaked out at the phone call, but in the last 2 hours, Brad, I got back to that place where God has control again. I've given him control again. It was so beautiful to me. We're gonna wrap up here with 2 practical steps. The first is this week, and try this today. I know it's the Super Bowl and it's busy and it's freezing cold outside. There's a lot going on. Try today a very sincere conversation with God. God, I want to focus you on my external, but I'm shifting with my church family to allowing you to deal first with my internal. Okay? Let's agree to begin practicing this regularly. Let's start that today.